I'm here with my family. This is my baby Romeo.
Me.
And Andre.
An Australian influencer, once known for his lavish lifestyle and designer clothes, is now accused of murdering his mother. Prosecutors say that life of luxury was all a facade, and in reality, he was in extreme debt. So what did he do? Well, he took out multiple life insurance policies on his mom, totaling more than $1 million. And the timing of this is suspicious too. All the policies were created just 1 week before her sudden death. We're heading down under to get a closer look at the case of Andre Rebello and hearing from international attorney David Tafuri to make sense of it all. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law and Crime News. There are a lot of players in this case, so let's start with the basics. This is Andre Rebello. He's the defendant in the case who, before his arrest, was known mostly as a social media influencer. This is his ex-girlfriend, Gracie Piscopo. They share a son together, and for years, Andre appeared in her social media, video, or posts. And the audience for her content is pretty major. Gracie boasts 300,000 subscribers on YouTube and more than 1 million followers on Instagram. There she posts lots of modeling photos, but on YouTube, viewers get a look inside her life. And that also means a look inside Andre's life.
Good morning, everybody. So I am currently back with the fam, well, with Andre anyway. We are staying in a hotel in Sydney.
So while it appears the couple was living a life to be desired, prosecutors say they were actually living beyond their means. Together, they had $120,000 in debt in 2020 and very little in the bank. By March of 2022, Andre actually declared bankruptcy. But his alleged crime actually happened about 2 years before all that. This is Andre's mother, 58-year-old Colleen Rebello. She lived in Western Australia in the Perth suburb of Bicton. It was there where she was found dead in the shower on May 25th, 2020. While she had a few pre-existing conditions, her death was unexpected and a shock for most of her family. That being said, at first, it wasn't considered suspicious. Emergency responders on the scene didn't see any signs that something was off and treated her death as sudden, but of natural causes. It was actually an insurance company who first raised alarm bells that something may be suspicious about Colleen's life insurance policy. After doing some digging, investigators determined it was Andre who took out the policies in his mother's name. He set up these policies in the week before she died and then started the claims process just days after her death. In order to receive the payout from these claims, Andre took it a step further, actually falsifying documents like the will and coroner's report to make himself the sole beneficiary of his mother's estate. All this seemed kind of strange to Andre's family, specifically because his brother Julian was actually listed as the executor. He only found out about Andre's claims after speaking with insurance companies. Julian recently testified at Andre's trial, saying his brother was acting strange and even surprising around the time of their mother's death. I want to thank Upside for sponsoring today's Law and Crime YouTube takeover. Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on gas and groceries. And yes, this is actually free cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight into your bank account. And it's truly so simple and easy to use. Once you have the Upside app, you can claim an offer for whatever you're buying. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card and then follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCTakeover to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. The morning of Colleen's murder, Gracie, that's the Instagram model, sent a slew of angry texts to Andre, demanding he answer his phone. She wrote things like, quote, "What is wrong with you?" and quote, "I'm fuming at you, I'm so angry." Some of these messages were read in court, and so too was a message Andre sent to his mom at 12:38 p.m., asking if she could watch his son later in the day or the following day. That afternoon, Andre texted his brother Fabian, saying he was gifting Fabian some clothes and he'd left them behind at their mom's house. So Colleen was supposed to pick up this brother, Fabian, after his shift at a supermarket, but she never showed up. He called her 13 times, and when she still didn't answer, he called his sister Monique. So Monique also tried to call Colleen, but she still didn't answer. Later text messages from both Monique and Fabian were sent to Andre, and they asked him to rush to their mother's home because she was found dead. At first, it wasn't suspicious, and it wasn't until later when insurance companies sounded the alarm. Employees there actually contacted police when noticing something was off around the activity in the life insurance claims. Colleen's psychologist actually reported all this too, suggesting Andre may have falsified some documents to get the payout. At first, Andre denied all of this, telling police he had no idea about any correspondence with the insurance companies. Eventually, though, Andre fessed up, admitting he falsified important documents, like his mother's last will and testament, medical records from his mom's psychologist, and even a coroner report. But in terms of his mother's murder, Andre says he didn't do it. So he pleaded guilty to all those forgery charges, but maintains he's innocent when it comes to the murder charge. Andre's defense team maintains that Colleen died of natural causes, arguing that an issue with her heart could have caused a cardiac arrhythmia. They also suggested she may have died from a brain aneurysm. But the prosecution counters all this, saying that while there's no official cause of death, forensic pathologists can't rule out the idea that Colleen was strangled to death or smothered. All this is unfolding in Western Australian Supreme Court as we speak. And to get a better idea of the case, we reached out to international attorney David Tafuri. So David, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you specifically is because this is an international crime. Obviously, we cover mostly United States crime here on Law and Crime, but this is happening in Australia. So I know there are some differences between the legal systems here and there, but murder is still the most severe charge down under, right?
That's correct. Murder is still the most significant charge. One difference, though, is that capital punishment is illegal in Australia. So capital punishment is not on the table here.
So as far as the verdict, let's say that this person does get convicted down the line in their sentencing, we don't have capital punishment in Australia. What would his sentence look like?
He would likely get a life sentence, right? I mean, he killed his mother. It looks like there was, premeditation based on the facts that we know. And so a life sentence is very likely if he's proven to be guilty.
Yeah, we're kind of jumping ahead right now talking about the verdict. Let's talk about everything leading up to it. So his mother died in 2020, so about 4 years ago at this point. But there wasn't an arrest in her murder until several years later. Why do you think there may have been that stretch in time between her death and then these murder charges?
It looks to me that that's because at first there was not suspicion around her cause of death, that they thought she died of natural causes. And I think this is also going to be the biggest issue in terms of whether the prosecution is able to prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, because the autopsies and medical examinations were inconclusive on the cause of death. But then there are lots of circumstances to suggest that her son was responsible for that death, and it was not a death by natural causes.
I'm glad that you brought that up because the autopsy is right away what jumped out to me. Obviously, that's what we want to know. How did this person die? And as you pointed out, the forensic pathologist wasn't able to officially determine how she died. It kind of got me thinking, I know we have that old adage, no body, no crime. It's nicer to have a body in the case because you can show what happened. We obviously have a body in this case, but we don't have a cause of death. So does that cause some issues for prosecutors?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest issues. Now, notably, because as a result of the autopsy and the autopsy report, they found that they could not rule out that she was smothered and suffocated. So that would have been by, unnatural causes. So they didn't rule that out, but they also didn't find any evidence to suggest that her son did that.
So these experts have actually gotten on the stand, like what you're talking about, saying we can't rule out she was smothered or strangled to death. How important do you think that testimony is for the prosecution?
I think that's really important. Obviously defense is making arguments that this was by natural causes. I think their argument is that she had a heart attack. There may be some evidence based on the analysis of her heart that she was vulnerable to having a heart attack, but it doesn't look like there's any evidence to suggest that was the cause either. So the fact that they were able to say on the stand that they can't rule out suffocation is really important for the prosecution, although the prosecution has to build a case using circumstantial evidence to show that the son had access and motive to suffocate her.
Okay, let's talk about motive, because obviously I'm more familiar with crime here in America, and motive is not required when you're talking about any sort of case here to yield a conviction. We don't need motive. It's nice to have, but we don't need it. What about in Australia? Do they require motive?
I think it's the same in Australia, although I'm not entirely certain. But from what I've been able to read about the case, the prosecution is arguing motive, and but I don't think it's a necessary element.
So the motive, you're right, may not be necessary, but is kind of key in this case because the prosecution might have a pretty strong one. So this son, Andre Rebello, actually took out several life insurance policies on his mom in the week leading up to her death. So literally 7 days leading up to her death. Those are obviously red flags, but does it mean that he killed her?
That's right. The motive is a really important part of this, and it's likely going to be very impactful for the jury. The timing, as you suggested, is very odd. I mean, just 7 days before, he took out three life insurance policies on his mom. He has admitted to fraud in the way he submitted claims under those life insurance policies. He apparently, according to testimony in the trial, didn't tell his siblings about these life insurance policies and may have even been trying to hide them from his siblings. So, and then add to that the volumes of evidence suggesting that he was bankrupt. He had declared bankruptcy months before. He had financial problems. He was living this glamorous life on social media, but behind the scenes, he could barely afford that life. So that's also part of the motive.
There are several things you mentioned there that I want to break down, but let's start with the siblings because some of them actually testified, and we also have admitted into evidence some of the text messages between Andre and his siblings around this time. And as you alluded to, and they testified, these siblings had really no idea about these life insurance policies, and their mother's death was a shock to them. So do you think their testimony and these texts and all their information is really important?
I do. I think it paints a picture of a son who was engaging in nefarious activities, who was hiding and deceiving his closest relatives, his brothers and sisters, and then profiting personally from doing that. And so the text messages, the phone calls that happened, apparently establish a effort to hide what he was doing.
And the motive to all of this, you pointed out, was that he was in quite a bit of debt, actually. It was interesting because he had a very front-facing life on YouTube or Instagram, basically social media, along with his ex-girlfriend, showing their lavish life. You know, we're going on boats, we're going on planes, all of these fun things. And then in reality, the bank account doesn't really match what they're portraying. Do you think that has a large part to do with this crime?
I think that has at least a large part in why this crime has gotten so much media attention. There's a sexiness to it. There's a relevance to it, given how important social media has become in people's lives. There's also a connection between the U.S. and Australia because you could see this type of crime happening here in the United States. We have a lot of social media influencers who are also trying to portray their lives in a certain way and doesn't always match up with how their life really is. They're oftentimes overspending in order to maintain that appearance on social media, but aren't able actually to support it. So you could see how this could happen here in the United States. And the social media part of it also gives us a view into the lives that they were leading, how they were interacting with other people. So it probably makes viewers and audience and people reading about this crime feel closer to the victim, to the alleged perpetrator, and to a girlfriend of the perpetrator.
Does all of this make things easier for investigators and prosecutors? And by that, I mean that we have a bunch of photos over years, videos, locations where we know where this person and his ex-girlfriend, girlfriend at the time, where they were. Does all of that make it a bit more easy for investigators to kind of trace the timeline?
Absolutely. I mean, the social media trail allows the prosecutors to give the jury a sense of what was happening, a context, and put pictures behind words. It also, the use of the cell phones, the text messages, the record of the text messages, and the fact that the alleged perpetrator's cell phone was pinging off certain cell phone towers, which the prosecution is using to show that he was at or near his mom's house around the time that she died, is also an important part of the evidence.
So we do have that. You're talking about the cell phone pinging, and that was just recently mentioned in the trial. So we do have that he was kind of near her location at the time of her death. But does that mean that he killed her just because he happened to be close to her? I mean, is that what the defense is going to point out?
No, obviously it would be illogical to jump to say that just because he was nearby means that he committed this crime. But what it does for the prosecution is helps them rule out any alibis that he might have about being elsewhere at the time of the murder. It establishes that he had opportunity and access to his mom around the time that she died.
What's interesting too about this defendant is he has actually fessed up to part of the crime. He said, hand up, I did forge some of those documents. There were some issues with this life insurance policy. Yes, I did it. However, he's saying, no, I did not kill my mom. So he's admitting guilt in one instance and then saying he isn't guilty in the other. I mean, should that hold any weight that he admitted to some of the crime?
Right. As you know, this is a typical defense strategy, right? Admit the things that you really can't contest, like the fact that he had, filed for these insurance policies right before her death, that he sought to get the proceeds of the funds, that he had engaged in fraud in the way that he filled out and submitted the forms. Those were going to be hard things for the defense to prove didn't happen. So they're admitting those, admitting a much lesser crime in order to try to gain credibility with the jury and with the judge for the defense that's more important, that will prevent the alleged perpetrator from going to jail for a lifetime, which is the defense to the murder charge.
So talking about the defense, obviously we focused a lot on the prosecution, all the evidence that they have, but do you think there's any defense that his team could bring?
Well, I think, the best defense for him, it sounds like, from what I've been able to read and learn about the case, is that she didn't die of unnatural causes, that she had a heart attack or something else. She did have pre-existing health conditions that they're also using to show that she was not healthy, that she was vulnerable to a natural death at a young age, relatively young. She was just 58 years old. And so that's probably the most important part of the defense.
I know that all of this kind of leads back to this insurance fraud and all of that, because initially her death didn't seem suspicious. And then the red flag was actually flown, I guess, by the psychologist of the mother. And then additionally, the insurance companies who actually went through and said something doesn't seem right. How vital is that to the case?
Well, it was absolutely vital in alerting the prosecution authorities that, hey, we should take another look at this death, and whether the conclusion that there were not suspicious circumstances was right. And this is, one of the big mistakes by the alleged perpetrator. He brought the focus on himself by the way he handled the life insurance policies, by the timing of the life insurance policies. That's going to set off all sorts of red flags for the insurance companies. Wait, we issued a policy and 7 days later there was a death, and within a week we have to pay out. That is, sets off all kinds of alarm bells within an insurance company. Insurance companies actively investigate these types of cases. They don't want to pay out when there are suspicious circumstances, and that's what led this to being raised to the level of the prosecution taking another look and re-examination of the death.
I think bottom line, we can say for sure it's suspicious at the time that these life insurance policies were filed. I'm sure the jury is going to consider that. And as far as deliberation, is there anything different between what would happen here with a jury in the United States versus what will happen in Australia?
Well, it's, some of the focus on the rights of the defendant that we have here in our system don't exist in Australia. So in that way, I think it may be harder for the defendant in Australia to keep out certain evidence and hide certain evidence from the jury. And I think that would probably be the biggest difference in terms of what the jury will be able to consider. they're going to be able maybe to see more information and hear more information, some of which would be excluded in a criminal trial here in the U.S.
It's going to be interesting to see what way the jury leans when the trial does wrap up. So we'll obviously be sure to follow that. David, thank you so much for coming on with us and breaking all of that down.
Thanks for having me again.
Once again, Andre has pleaded not guilty to the murder charge, and his ex-girlfriend, that social media influencer Gracie Piscopo, hasn't been charged or accused with any wrongdoing. For Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.